I am a mostly speaking part-time AAC user, and I found AAC in adulthood. I've been using technologies that were actually designed for AAC use for about 12 years, mostly Proloquo for text and FlipWriter. I also pretty regularly use mainstream technologies that are relevant to my communication needs, just, for AAC reasons. My best multilingual speech generation option is eSpeak at the moment, which was not actually designed for AAC. So I finished my PhD in interdisciplinary neuroscience at the University of Rhode Island in May 2021. My dissertation was quantifying and compensating for P300 variations in amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. So working within user trial to trial variability in timing of the P300 response for the P300 speller. There's actually no overlap between the assistive technologies I use for my ME and the ones that I studied for my PhD. Not only do I not need a BCI, but also my sensory issues do not get along with the intensifications needed for P300 BCIs, so I can't. Describe the current role, I'm going to say wildly insufficient and leave it at that. Should be as much as the end user wants, up to and including getting the training to be the researcher in charge of the whole project. Hi. At the very least, what we want from the technology needs to guide the research and development priorities.
Yeah.
I prepare most of what I say for any interview or presentation I do in advance, as an accommodation to myself, and, even more so for my audience. Those who are hopefully listening and trying to understand what I am saying, as well as my perspective. People who have little to no understandable speech rely on a range and multiple modes of augmentative and alternative communication to express ourselves and to be understood. And what is seldom well understood is the tremendous toll we pay, expending incalculable amounts of physical, cognitive, and psychological energy and time doing so. And we pay an extraordinary high user tariff for doing so. While it pales in comparison, those we communicate and interact with are similarly adversely affected by this unacknowledged tax. Simply put, many do not understand us because of these factors. Sometimes speech-generating devices and similar technology can help lower that taxation. But it can, and does, often, exacerbate that burden several times over. The same is true of artificial intelligence when used by anyone with little to no self-directed movement. AI is great when it is tailored to an individual, on who they are, how they think, what drives them, how they express themselves. Much of which, I hope, can be grounded on, and reflected in, small language models as well as, with the permission, of the person. Input from others they know and trust. When artificial intelligence is left to its own devices. However, I know myself it can lead to being sent down a rabbit's hole, as well as self-incrimination and being made to look less than in our own eyes, the eyes of others, and society at large. As researchers, you need to figure out how your work can blunt rather than trigger such effects. AI, as we all know, is not perfect. It is going to screw up, and there is nothing you can do to anticipate and prevent 100% of those hellacious incidents. As researchers, though, you have both the opportunity and the obligation to explicitly focus on driving the taxation and error rates down as much as possible. That can only be done by recognizing that people like Pancho Ramirez, who put everything on the line to work with you, see, San Francisco, researchers to prove thoughts alone can be transformed into language, are not research subjects to poke, direct, and mold to conform to research protocols. No, they are your and my equals. They have knowledge and experience you do not, and quite frankly, will never have. Indispensable to your work, that you need to partner with, and be guided by. I am making these points up front because they help ground and frame much of what I need to convey. BWS response to question 1: what are your experiences? As you know, Mel, I rarely do what I am told or answer the precise question I am being asked. I want to start by saying the following about myself. I am 68 years old and was born with significant cerebral palsy. The way it continues to impact me the most by the fact that there has never been a time in my life and career when most people have understood what I say orally, readily, reliably, or entirely. And that has been true with regard to my parents, family, friends, teachers, classmates, roommates, lovers, my spouse, and stepchildren, co-workers, and the federal public servants I had the privilege to work with at HHS and SSA. But the exact opposite has also always been true. There has also never been a time in my life, even when I was a very young child, I could not and did not find a way to express myself and be understood. By smiling, gesturing, speaking words those around me could understand. Changing the intensity of my pupils and gaze. Answering yes or no questions by all means available. And I have been extremely lucky to have just enough physical dexterity to use a range of both assistive and ubiquitous technology. All of which started with me pecking away at an IBM typewriter as a child 60 years ago. To prove to others what my parents and brothers and sisters already knew. Bobby could read and write. And, unfortunate for you listening now, always has had a lot to say. Of course, many other people with minimal movement, or unreliable, or seemingly uncontrollable movement, have fewer natural and technology-assisted ways of expression and being understood than you and I do. But of those I have known and advocated with, over the decades, many have found effective ways to connect and communicate with those around them, and exert all they have to communicate with those that fail or just refuse to understand. Or like the current HHS secretary, debase autistic people, and by extension others with communication disabilities, as hopeless, and having nothing to say, do, or contribute. Such stereotypes are real, pervasive, and damning. And thanks to the tenor of our times, such biases and their consequences are metastasizing. Your job as BCI researchers, and mine as one who works to create social justice for all, have vital and similar roles to play in disrupting it. Specifically, we can do this by elevating the fact that all people express ourselves in multiple ways. That advances in brain science and related fields indicate that the brain is far more plastic and capable of rewiring than once assumed. And how human speech is produced and its relationships to other brain functions, particularly in respect to cognition, also appear to be different than what they have long been assumed to be. We must also seek to better understand and strengthen in real time the current strategies and tools people who might, or might not ever, benefit from the BCI research you and your colleagues conduct. To be clear, I see doing this as an ethical imperative on your part. If you are going to have people as partners, not just research subjects that your institutional review board nominally reviews, approves of, and which vouches their rights are not being violated, you must do more than provide them de minimis compensation or treat them well. While I am not going to touch on what all of this might entail, I will say this. Doing mere due diligence is never sufficient. It needs to begin with the respect and recognition that makes too clear to them, academe, and all others, that the intense blend of time, energy, mind-bending effort, and insight they invest in your research is integral to gathering new knowledge and identifying possible solutions. As such, I believe, you should further make it clear in writing that you and your team will seek to better understand and do what you can do to enhance and expand their right and power of expression, beginning immediately. As I said, I believe this is your ethical duty. I likewise believe it is central to the success of your work and what you hope to achieve through your research. I do not pretend to understand or fathom the intricacies of what you are studying. But based on my lived experiences and those of others with a range of early and later onset disabilities, I know, it is clear that many of us have a deep and deliberate way of expressing ourselves. And that gaining a greater understanding of what that entails and exploring how to leverage it is critical. Doing the basic research you are engaged in is never easy, nor as well understood or as valued as it should. That is recklessly truer today than at other in recent memory. Some of what I have said is unapologetically strident, and from my vantage point necessarily so. But believe me when I say I view the work you do is vital to those you seek to assist, and to reveal the humanity that is intrinsic to all of us, and that all of us can embrace, practice, and reciprocate in, if we choose. Thank you.
I'm a semi-speaking autistic adult, and I have been using apps on my iPad to help me communicate for 7 or 8 years now. Life is so much better than before I had this assistive technology. I like to save long paragraphs in my spelling-based app. For example, when I give presentations about being semi-speaking and autistic. And I use a highly customized symbols-based app for more of my day-to-day communication with support workers and loved ones. My voice on both of those apps is based on my mouth words, created via the new iOS accessibility feature called Personal Voice. I also use IP text relay to place phone calls for medical care, and I type into Zoom's chat box for video calls related to the AC research I collaborate on. It's so amazing to actually be able to say what I want to say. Probably the most important thing for my success with assistive tech is for me to have autonomy over the details of it. I need to be able to switch between a range of communication technologies depending on my fluctuating disability traits and the situations I'm in. For example, I'm pretty fast with my symbols-based app, and that's in part because I've chosen the exact locations and visual cues for each word to make them easiest to remember. So that customizability works really well for me personally. I also really appreciate opportunities to interact with and give feedback to developers of the communication apps I use. Even in instances it doesn't result in direct impacts to my own usage, the general engagement feels meaningful for influencing communication supports in the future. From my point of view as an assistive tech user who works on participatory research teams, I can't overstate the importance of doing research and development within users involved at literally every step. And to me, this should include research around implementation and basic access, because ideas about what that's going to look like for the user and their support people should really be baked into the vision for a product from the outset. Best practices around privacy, accessibility, autonomy, and more should always be shaped by communities of current and prospective end users. This is going to improve new technologies' social validity as well as help advance disability justice principles in the field. I do say communities in the plural deliberately. Disabled people are not a monolith, but more of a Venn diagram, diverse groups of often multiply marginalized people who happen to use similar technology. All of those perspectives need to be incorporated into R&D, not just the perspective of those of us who are loudest or most well-known. When research is truly participatory, folks from all backgrounds and with all kinds of support needs are able to contribute their views and priorities every step of the way. Whenever that's not happening, I hope folks can at least start from a place of applying a lens of the social model of disability. The baseline assumption should never be that end users of assistive technology are simply incapable of contributing to research and development. Rather, look to the R&D process, protocols, procedures, and personnel to locate barriers to end user involvement. Those can be proactively addressed to get more of us in the door from the ground up. The technological successes developed via that kind of deliberately anti-ableist teamwork are increasingly likely to improve end users' health outcomes and quality of life.
Thank you for talking with me about this important topic. I am 30 years old, and I have been using augmentative and alternative communication, or AAC, for 28 years. I have a neuromuscular condition called spinal muscular atrophy, or SMA, type 2. I spoke using my physiological voice when I was very young, but I received a tracheostomy when I was 2 years old because I had sleep apnea following a hospitalization and intubation. And I was not able to speak after that because I could not tolerate the speaking valve. I received my first high-tech speech-generating device when I was about 2.5 years old. I have been using a computer with speech software on it for meetings. When I am sitting up, I cannot use the trackball, so I use iGaze. My iGaze speech-generating device is an iGaze Edge by LC Technologies. LC Technologies has become iGaze Incorporated. When I received my iGaze device, I began using Grid3 software instead of Dynavox. Trackballing is becoming more difficult for me because of weakness and contractures in my hand. But I cannot use eye gaze for meetings because I split the screen and have grid 3 on one side of the screen and the meeting software on the other side of the screen so that I can see the speech software and the meeting software at the same time. I have to use one monitor for both because I cannot turn my head. Unfortunately, the eye gaze does not calibrate to only one side of my screen. So, I can't use it for meetings. I think that end users should be involved in all of the phases of research, development, and evaluation for assistive technologies for communication, because our needs are what is driving the research and development in the first place. I think that end users need to be involved in the design process from the beginning. Our needs are what should drive the design. I imagine that research and development of technology is expensive. So, I assume that a designer will want to be as efficient as possible and avoid having to redo any of the design, if possible. Also, I expect that the designer will want to design a product that is useful for the broadest range of people possible. Although people who need assistive technologies for communication have in common that we experience speech disabilities, the causes of those speech disabilities are diverse. And we have a wide range of skills and challenges that complicate our access to communication and technology, even within the same underlying condition. The designer needs to understand the causes and mechanics of the speech disabilities and the supports that we need to access the technologies in order to design technologies that will be most widely useful and accessible. The designer needs to be aware of and informed in the barriers and also the abilities within the target disability groups. For example, people with SMA experience tightness in our jaws, and many have respiratory insufficiency, which affects the breath support needed for speech. We also have physical challenges, direct selection due to muscle weakness. And many of us, like me, have to use an on-screen keyboard, typing one letter at a time, like someone hunting and pecking with a single finger. On the other hand, some people who experience autism are able to type with two hands, and they are able to switch to using their AAC when their physiological voices are unavailable to them. End users might also know about idiosyncrasies that the designer isn't aware of. For example, my friends and I participated in a research project interview with a person who is designing a virtual platform specifically for people who use AAC. We told her that it is really important for the captioning to be as accurate as possible, because captioning tends to do a poor job of picking up AAC voices. And we explained to her that it was very important to us to have accurate captioning, because we have friends who are deaf and hard of hearing. And we want them to be able to understand what we are saying. In almost every opportunity that I have to talk with researchers, I make sure to mention captioning as important to AAC users. It is something that doesn't always occur to people. And some people haven't had the experience of trying to use captioning to understand what an AAC user is saying. The designer also needs to know about all possible end users. I attended a webinar on brain interface technology, and the design was being tried out on people who experience ALS. It occurred to me that SMA has some similarities to ALS in that it affects motor neurons, and it is often referred to as infantile ALS. So I asked if people who experience SMA might be a population that could be included in trials. But many people are not aware that there are adults living with SMA. Those adults, and in particular those who experience the most severe form of SMA, could benefit from brain interface control of their speech devices. People with type 1 SMA have very little movement except for their eyes. I think that brain interface would change their lives for the better. Identifying not just a few groups that could benefit, but all groups that might benefit from the product could lead to greater success. As technology improves and becomes more sophisticated, there are more possibilities for improving access to speech for people who experience speech disabilities. End users should be involved in the ongoing development of devices and technologies for communication, all along in the process for the same reasons that we should be involved in the design. I would think that it would be much less expensive and time-consuming to have a process for end users to consult during the development phase, rather than have to back and fix or adapt something.